Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well. And in this video, we'll be doing a full review for the Sigma 24-35 f2 zoom lens for Canon EF mount cameras. Now, there's also going to be a Nikon F mount as well as a Sigma SA mount, and perhaps down the road, there'll be other mounts available for this lens. Now, one of the real amazing thing about this lens that makes it so different from everything else you can get out there is that it's a full frame zoom lens that has a constant aperture of f2, making it one of the fastest zooms that you can get out in the market for your full frame DSLR. And alongside those remarkable optical capabilities, it also comes at a fairly competitive price tag, especially when you start comparing this thing to other full frame DSLR lenses that you can get. Now, the key goal of this video is to figure out whether this thing is actually worth owning for professionals or amateurs that really want to blend the versatility of a zoom lens coupled with the image quality that you get out of a standard prime. So without any further ado, let's get right into this review. Now, recently, a lot of people have been really impressed with the Art series of lenses from Sigma. To me personally, as a lens manufacturer, Sigma is doing some really innovative stuff that is really pushing the envelope of what a standard lens can do, and they're really giving Canon and Nikon a good run for their money these days. And the new 24-35 f2 DG HSM is really no exception to that upward trend. As soon as you pick up the lens, you'll notice that it feels very well built and up there with anything you can get from Canon. It's using actually a thermally stable composite material, which ensures that the lens won't weigh too much relative to its specifications. It's also going to be a little bit more resistant to internal thermal changes as you move from indoor and outdoor conditions. It really does feel like a pro level lens. It's made out of a mixture between metal construction as well as rubberized materials. And when it comes to the ergonomics themselves, the lens rings are weighted very nicely. The zoom and focus ring are very smooth in terms of their operation. Plus, if you shoot a lot of video, you'll be happy to know that this lens zooms internally, so you won't have to worry about the balance being thrown off, especially if you do a lot of Steadicam work, or you're going to put this on a gimbal or any kind of slider where the weight distribution is going to be pretty constant throughout the range. Now, physically speaking, this is certainly not a lightweight and compact lens compared to what you're going to find in the world of mirrorless cameras. It weighs about 940 grams, about 2.07 pounds in terms of diameter. You're looking at about 88 millimeters, and it's about 123 millimeters in terms of its length. So for all you people that want to be as portable and as stealthy as possible, perhaps this is not the best lens for you, but keep in mind this is designed for a large full frame camera, and it goes well with that combination. Now, in terms of the internal specifications, this lens is made out of 18 elements and 13 groups. It has a focal range of 24-35, so that's only about 11 millimeters, which is a fairly narrow focal range. Now, we have 9 aperture blades, and the aperture notes have a rounded diaphragm, so even if you stop down, your out of focus elements are still going to be fairly circular in terms of their composition. Now, in terms of the autofocusing capabilities, this lens is fairly fast. You can definitely use it for a lot of different applications. For fast-paced sports, it's up there with the speed and precision that you would get with a Canon L series lens. Furthermore, we have an ultrasonic motor, so your focusing operation is very silent. In fact, take a listen yourself. And because the focusing system is so good, this would be an excellent lens if you want to do a little bit of autofocusing in video, especially if you have one of those hybrid AF cameras from Canon. Now, finally, let's talk about the main selling point of this lens, and that's the image quality. Overall, I think it's fantastic, but it's definitely not perfect, especially when it comes to distortion and vignetting. When it comes to actually shooting at 24 millimeters, when you're looking at straight lines, you are going to notice a little bit of lens distortion, not by much. And again, this is easily correctable in Photoshop or Lightroom, but keep in mind that lens distortion becomes fairly minimal as you go closer to that 35 millimeter range where things are a lot more symmetrical. Now, in terms of the vignetting effect, there is still going to be a little bit of fall off in the corners when you shoot at f2 at 24 millimeters, but to show you how far Sigma has come, I actually have one of their older 24 millimeters f1.8 lens that is a full frame lens as well, and you could see that basically both of them are shooting a white scene. Both of them are set to f2, and the older 24 f1.8 exhibits a lot more fall off. You can see that those corners are a lot more darker than what we encounter on the new 24 to 35 f2. And even though it's impressive to see the distinction between the two, there is still a pretty decent amount of vignetting that is noticeable on your pictures when you shoot at wide open at that wide focal range. And even though you can probably correct any vignetting issues in Lightroom or Photoshop, it's still an issue that you're going to have to combat with if you want to shoot at the wide focal range wide open. Furthermore, in terms of color fringing, this lens exhibits very little chromatic aberration, so when shooting areas of extreme contrast, you'll have little to no issues when it comes to CA. Now moving forward, one of the most impressive things about this lens, and one of the things that makes it so valuable to me, is the fact that it's actually very usable at f2. The sharpness in the center is fantastic, and it's fairly sharp around the corners as well. Certainly maybe not as sharp as f5.6, which is kind of its sweet spot, and at f16 there is some diffraction, so it's certainly not as sharp as larger aperture settings such as f10 and f8. Now in terms of the out of focus elements in the background, when you shoot at those wide open apertures, it looks very nice and smooth. Things look very fluid, and it's not distracting at all. It's certainly not a proper portrait lens like what you would get with a 50 or 85mm, but you can definitely pull off a lot of different things with this lens, especially if you want to zoom in with your feet at 35mm. Now another great thing about the lens is the coatings are really top notch, up there with the best lenses out there. You can barely encounter any kind of flaring even if you shoot straight into the sun, which is super impressive and great if you shoot a lot of landscape or architectural photography. Now to sum up everything we talked about, we're going to list the pros and cons of this lens to figure out if it's worth owning. Now in terms of the cons themselves, it's a fairly large and heavy lens, so it's certainly larger than a traditional prime lens, and coupled that with a full frame DSLR, it's not going to make the most sleekest package out there, and that might not be ideal for some people. Additionally, there is no optical stabilization, so unlike some of the stuff you can get from Canon and Nikon, at this point Sigma has not launched a version with optical stabilization, so that's definitely going to be not as nice for some people that like to shoot with slower shutter speed for low light purposes. And of course, it would have been awesome to have stabilization, especially for people that shoot a lot of handheld video. Furthermore, as we mentioned, this lens is not completely perfect optically. You're still going to have to combat the issues with a little bit of distortion and vignetting, especially shooting wide open at 24mm. And lastly, one of the biggest, I think, downsides of this lens is the fact that it's fairly narrow in terms of its focal range, about only 11mm, and that's definitely a bit short, especially if you start to compare it to the versatility of a 24 to 70mm lens that most full frame shooters swear by. Now, in terms of the pros, there's definitely a lot of stuff to like over here. Firstly, it's one of the fastest zoom lenses you can get out there with a maximum constant aperture of f2. There's little to no competition for this thing. So if you're looking for a kind of a prime lens that has the versatility of a little bit of zoom, you definitely want to check this one out. Secondly, it's really sharp at all of the f-stops, especially if you want to shoot wide open. You have usable sharpness throughout your image, which is really fantastic to see. The autofocusing system is very fast and quiet, as we mentioned in the video, so it's great for both stills and video shooters, especially if you have a hybrid AF camera. And the last thing that I really like about this lens is definitely the value aspect of things. The price tag is just under $1,000, and when we take a look at the competition of full frame 35mm lenses, that's a fairly competitive price tag for what this thing can do optically, and just the fact that it is one of the fastest zoom lenses you can get out there, and it's still under $1,000. If you take a look at anything what Nikon and Canon has to do at 24mm with a large aperture, you're at least looking at something around this price, if not more. Plus you get the versatility of the fact that you do have a little bit of a zoom range, even though it's fairly limited to begin with, but I think it's going to make up all those limitations when it comes to the image quality and overall performance. So definitely check out this 24 to 35mm lens from Sigma, and the the awesome thing is, even if you have a crop sensor DSLR, you can still keep this lens as you move forward into a full frame, and the price is definitely not going to fluctuate. One of the awesome things about a lens like this, it's a solid investment for anybody out there. It will hold its value for years and years, I guarantee it. And please, if you're remotely interested in this lens, definitely check out the link in the description down below. It's a B&H link. Without them, this video certainly wouldn't be possible, so you definitely want to give them a big shout out. And if you are interested in getting this lens or anything else, go through our links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps make videos like this possible in the first place. And thank you so much for your continuing support. We really do appreciate it quite a bit. But other than that, that's it. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.